So welcome to Study Chess with me. And you might be under the impression that I'm proposing to give classes in chess. Maybe this would be a series or something. And that's not really the case. So let me explain what this is all about. The idea is exactly what the title suggests, study chess with me. Now, I'm a player, and I've been a player for, a little over 30 years. I was really active in the 90s and the early 2000s. I peaked at 2200 something. And then my last official tournament game was around 2009, according to the FIDE website, saying that my rating was 2149, which is probably a fair assessment. And I don't even know if that rating is really valid anymore because, well, like I said, that was in 2009 and we are 2021. So what is the goal here? Well, as a player, I'm really itching to get back into tournament play. And I need to study. I mean, we all need to study chess if we're to improve our level. And for me, it's not just improving, it's also getting back to where I was. So my goal is to begin to study chess in all of its aspects: tactics, positional play, openings, visualization skills, endgames. And I know from experience that studying is a lonely business. It doesn't matter if you have a personal coach. They'll show you all the lessons, give you everything you need to know, but in the end, you have to actually do the study yourself. There's no question about it. They'll give you tactics, you have to study them. They'll give you endgame positions that you have to resolve, you have to study them. And you'll have to do this alone. Whether they're or not they're there is unimportant. So I appreciate this aspect. And I'm sure that this is something that is not just myself who feels this, everyone feels this. So the idea here is for me to study chess and for you to be able to study either with me or alongside me. Maybe you find my material too weak, too strong, whatever the case, or maybe just different. You can put the video on and study your own things and have me in the background, just keeping you company, knowing that I am truly studying at the same time. However, I do invite you to study what I am studying as well. And how would that work? Now, I don't propose to be giving you lectures since like I said, I'm going to be learning myself. So I will be using material from books, such as Ludek Pachman's Complete Chess Strategy in 3 volumes. This is a classic work that came out in the 70s. It's been condensed now into a version of 1 volume by Dover. It's not really as good. And for tactics, I'll be using Chess-Based Tactics. For endgames, I've chosen Dvoretsky's masterpiece, Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual, which is designed to teach you endgame play as well as all the key positions. And I will be resolving those exercises, all of the positions, myself, for real. You won't find me declaring on camera, oh, look at how brilliant I am. I just solved the 3rd Troitsky endgame study, one of those mind-boggling ones. For the 3rd time, I'm just brilliant, because, of course, this is pointless. Yeah, it might look brilliant on camera, but when it comes to a real game, well, all that hot air won't really help, will it? So I won't be, of course, giving you a panning camera on the book or off a chessboard because, well, you wouldn't really be able to follow it. It's really impractical. So when I propose a position and I'm actually studying that live, I will put actually it'll be here on the camera, 2D large board with the position, with a text telling you what's going on. I will give you an interlude and I will begin to study that myself. Now, obviously, some of these positions will take a lot of time because they're just difficult. What can I say? And when that happens, I will probably edit out a lot of the thinking time. I will then warn you when I'm about to solve the position by saying, well, I think I've solved it, or I've done analyzing it, or whatever the case might be. And this will give you a heads up if you want to pause it and continue studying it on your own, doing the same material that I am actually studying. I will then, because you have to get something out of this, otherwise, it's not really as interesting or constructive for you, I will then share not just the solutions given by the authors or the continuations, I will tell you my thoughts, my challenges, my difficulties. You will see me blunder. I will be open about these. And the same is true of tactical solutions and exercises that I'll be solving, because I will be studying tactics. What won't you see here? Well, for one thing, there are 2 things that I will be studying as well that will not be in this series. The first is openings. I know how openings are important, and I'm not putting those down, but openings, and it's not for secrecy, is a very personal thing. It's a, everyone is a little different. I might prefer a line in the Sicilian or the King's Indian or the Caracan or whatever it might be. And you might be interested in studying something completely different. And I think that everyone should be able to do that on their own. It's not going to be helpful to you. I want to use universal subjects and topics that you can benefit from just as much as any other player. But here I propose to study, let's say, 60 minutes worth or 90, and I will be sharing with you all of the material so that you can study the same material. I will share you my thoughts and finally the actual solutions. And I invite you to join me on this journey of chess evolution, chess study, and so that we can do it together. So now I'm going to get started on my tactics session. And yes, we're going straight to it. I will open the Chess-Based Tactics website. It's the one that I really prefer to my tactical study. If you are much lower level, I would recommend works that are dedicated to thematic study. Not general all kinds of positions, but really, double attacks, decoys, deviation, square vacation, all of those things in a very controlled, measured manner. In my experience, that's what will give you the greatest benefits if you are, let's say, 1500, 1600, or the like. In my case, it gave me, I estimate, at least 300 to 400 elo, really. So let's open up the tactics and see what we get here. So this is the website that I like to use. There are others, and if you prefer another one and you happen to use it instead of books, Chess Tempo, chess.com, and I'm sure there are others that I haven't even thought of. They're all fine. I like this one because, well, it really ticks all the boxes for me. And I have a video at this on my channel, which you're welcome to investigate and see what it's all about. In this particular case, it provides a wide range of exercises that are adapted to your rating. The rating it gives you, but doesn't matter because once it's figured out where you fit in the grand scheme of things and its positions, it will start feeding you positions around there. Sometimes a little stronger, sometimes a little weaker, just to keep you off balance, but nevertheless. And the rating here is not, you see here 2315, isn't actually the rating of the entire puzzle, curiously enough. This is the rating of the move of the puzzle. You will find positions that are easier in this very exercise, possibly. If the second move is just a recapture, the rating difficulty might go way down. And if the next move is incredibly hard to find, and this will be based on statistics of other players, then it can be incredibly more difficult. So let's take a look at this. And it says 2315. My rating in this website is 2467. Don't make too much about that. I've seen players on the reading list of this website that are 3500 elo. Obviously, there aren't a lot of 3500 elo players, so it's probably calibrated accordingly. Okay. All right. I spent a lot of time on this position, several minutes actually. It's not obvious. My first thoughts, honestly, were themes on rook takes d7 and trying to make that work because, of course, there are multiple forks and double attack possibilities that kind of ask to be looked at, but doesn't really lead to anything. Of course, there's the double check here, the double attack here, potentially, if the bishop were distracted. So rook d6, but really doesn't amount to anything. Sure, you can't castle immediately because, well, d7 is hanging, but so what? Does rook e6 actually threaten anything fatal? I don't think so. Then I started to look at other options. And the idea that came to me belatedly, and I'm hoping this is the solution, it might tell me that I'm completely out of my mind, is knight c5. And the idea here is that if knight takes c5, which is, of course, the first move that has to be asked, question, is queen c8 check, then obviously bishop d8 is not possible because of rook takes d8 or queen takes d8 mate. So king e7, queen takes c7 check, king goes somewhere, and I get the other knight, and we've gotten two pieces for one. A nice win. But black would then play knight b6 instead of taking on c5 because he's going to try to protect c8, and of course he has to remove the knight because it's being attacked 3 times and there's no way out of it. So knight c5, knight b6, queen e6 check. That's what I came up with. Obviously, queen takes. There's really no choice. Things are going to go really badly otherwise, as far as I can tell. Is it forced? Well, let's see what happens if he takes. Yeah, no, I think it's forced. Queen e6, queen takes, knight takes, and this bishop on c7 is in big trouble. It can't come to d6, obviously. It can't go to d8 for the same reason, because the rook is attacking as well. If it goes to b8, then rook d8, and we will get exchange, bishop, everything. So, yeah, I think that's the move. I guess I'd really need to analyze quickly what happens if it doesn't take. So, rook f8, obviously, only move. Yeah, knight d7 check. If knight d7 check, knight takes d7, then queen takes queen, king takes, rook takes, and we get c7 at the end. That looks pretty strong. And if king g8, well, we can still win a pawn. If king g8, then queen takes f7, king takes f7, knight takes b6, bishop takes b6, rook d7 check, and rook takes b7. Should be good. All right. Well, we'll go with that and see what if we're completely wrong, and if we're wrong, then what's wrong with this proposed continuation. When it says continue, it means you played the right move. So that was nice. Okay. So let's see if the wait, he took. I'm curious to know what it had in mind for the rest of the line. See, one of the things about websites like this is that they'll give you the main line. They won't investigate all of the sub-solutions, which are often the most difficult and challenging ones. But for whatever reason, since it's a computer usually doing the analysis to find these positions, it just goes for the other ones because it was obviously refuted, but not to a human. Okay, so we'll play our move, and we will take a look. Solved. But let's take a look at what the other moves would have garnered, because it would be interesting to know if my other line, because as you saw, it was different, what it would have yielded. So let's take back, and we'll do something different. Maybe I'll find out that my whole line was completely unnecessary. We'll play knight b6, and I'm going to turn on the engine here, and it's probably being covered by the video of me in the corner. I'll tell you what it says here. It says knight e6 flat out. Huh. Okay, that's interesting. It says knight e6, queen e7. Oh, I'm really astonished. Queen e7, knight takes e7, check. And Queen e6 check. Okay. Queen e7. Queen takes b6. Oh, well, I guess I would have to admit that's simpler. But out of curiosity, was my queen e6 completely bad? I mean, maybe it wasn't the right winning and winningest solution, but it's always good to look. So queen e6. Oh, it's not terrible. It tells me plus 1.82, 1.9. And I don't know what engine's being used here, honestly. That doesn't matter. I mean, this is simple tactics. 1.94. So it's not bad. It wasn't the best move, but it's not catastrophic by any means. And yeah, it says that queen e6, queen takes e6, knight takes e6. It doesn't actually allow for the queen g8. I'm wondering what it had in mind for that. King f7 and knight takes e7, and yeah, it's pretty much the line we had investigated earlier. So let's go back really quickly. I am curious to know if it had played king f8, what would happen? It says the move is queen h3. Never would have seen that. All right, well, I'm going to play my move anyway. I mean, it's what I would have played, right? So knight d7 check, I would never play queen h3. Really not. The line it's giving is queen h3, king g8, a4. So is knight d7 catastrophic? No, it's not. 1.64. Okay. Difference between an engine and a human, I guess. Although I'm sure the super GMs would have found this. King g8. All right. We had agreed on that. Queen f5. Oh, it's just killing me here with all of these alternate moves. Okay. So I would have taken here. That was the line that I proposed. Let's see if it's at least any good. It's all right. It's only +1 here. Yeah, it's kind of what I suggested. All right. King takes f7, knight takes, bishop takes, rook d7, king g6, sure. Rook takes b7. And yeah, and that's the line that I had proposed. And it's +1, which is fair since I had concluded it would win a pawn. Okay, good to know. So let's go to the next position. (1909). Remember, that's probably only the opening move. It's very possible that the entire combination is very hard, and that the second move or the third move is really the, you know, the hammer blow. But maybe not. Now, obviously, the ideas of queen takes e8 and knight f6 check don't work because of the bishop on g7. No idea what's coming. Knight c7 seems pretty straightforward, honestly. Is there a Zwischens over here? Oh, I don't see it. So let's try knight c7. That's bizarre. All right. Okay. It was one of the easy ones. Another one. Knight e4. Right to move. Well, it's made in 2, isn't it? It looks like a made in 2. So, all right. So this move is already a little harder, presumably. 2075. It looks pretty easy to me. So I have a solution. Um, I think it's rook e3. Queen does whatever it wants. There's no check here. And pick up the rook. Okay. White to move and win. Okay, I think I found the solution. As far as I can tell, it's, yeah, don't pay too much about the 2025. These positions don't always correspond. So obviously there's a double attack here, and the move by the queen will allow a simple check to get out of it if that's necessary. So white wouldn't be winning anything. My solution is bishop takes c6 to remove the check possibility. Pawn takes. Queen g4, threatening mate. g6. I don't really see what else. f6 just allows bishop takes, as far as I can tell. Maybe that's the move. So g6 and queen d4. Remember, there's no knight here. Threatening mate, so he'll do something to protect the mate. I will assume he can do something to protect the mate. Followed by bishop c3, winning the knight. All right, let's see what happens. So far, so good. He gave up the knight. Okay. What am I missing? Still missing threatening mate. All right, I'll just play this. Okay, that was the solution. So I'm going to wrap up the tactics here for now, and I'm going to be moving on to the next part of my study. And that will be positional play by Ludek Pachman. So you may have noticed a change in the lighting, and the reason is that there was a storm looming, darkened really fast around here. So I took advantage and, well, turned on the headlights and all that jazz. So let's continue. So here is volume 2 of Ludek Pachman's wonderful complete chess strategy trilogy of books. I did a little bit of searching at the time, and translations aside, there are no algebraic versions in English that I know of. So this is all, unfortunately, descriptive notation. And I will say it's not my favorite. I mean, I've used it plenty in the past because there are classic books like that, but it's painful. I mean, to give you an example of knight f6, it would be written capital N dash K B3, meaning knight to king's bishop's third from black's point of view. Yeah, because every time you have it, it's not even from the same perspective, it's always inverted. So knight king's bishop third could be knight f3 or knight f6, depending on which side it is to play. Lovely. Still, it's a wonderful work. I'm really partial to the French version. At the time, I read actually the first 2 volumes. I never read the third. They certainly taught me a lot. And I just feel that revisiting these fundamentals while I try to get my bearings back in chess will be a good way to get my grounding, even if I'm familiar with the material and the concepts. Maybe some of these lessons will benefit from a refresher. And at the same time, if you're not familiar with it or you're in the same situation as I am, then you can enjoy this as well. Just to mention though, there are many classic works on strategy, both very old and modern. And this is by no means saying that this is better than they are. It's simply the one I have and that I'm comfortable with and that I know. But if you use other books as well, then by all means, I'm sure they're fantastic. So the first game we have, this is volume 2, Principles of Pawn Play and the Center. And I'm going to skip all of the prelude where he goes into lengthy explanations about what this is about and what the purpose is here. This is all pawn play. This one is the chapter on passed pawns. And the first game we have is by Furman versus, he says Holmov, but most places actually spell it Kolmov. It might be the same pronunciation though, which is Kholmov. In fact, I should probably update that here. There we go. So the play starts with, don't worry, d4, knight f6, c4, e6. He only makes the first comment on the 15th move because it's relevant to the lesson of passed pawns. Knight c3, bishop b4, e3. I did take the liberty of actually searching the key games first so that wouldn't have to go through all of the move by move kind of thing. The notations, though, I'm going to have to still read from the book. So just so you know how this is going. Castle, bishop d3. So we have a standard Nimzo Indian. Knight f3, knight c6. Yeah, I don't know what the theory is on this. This is not a line that I actually play with either color. But knight c6 looks strange to me. There's no comment in the book itself. But for obvious reasons, nowadays, I would assume that putting the knight in front of the pawn would be, well, let's just say unorthodox. I could be wrong, though. Castle, a6, h3, h6, a3. Well, we've gotten all those out of the way. D takes c4. Okay. It makes kind of sense. If you push the bishop be out of the way with, I mean, this is not the book. This is just my obvious instant thoughts. If you either do bishop a5, then of course h4, bishop a6, c5, and yeah, that bishop is going to struggle to get out of there. The only way will be to somehow, remove the knight, advance the pawn, get the queen to bishop to b8 and whatever, and oh my goodness, have you wasted a lot of time. So let's get back to the game. D takes c4, bishop takes c4, bishop d6, e4, e5, bishop e3. Okay, this is looking fairly modern actually now. Rook e8, rook e1, e takes d4. Okay, knight takes d4. So Pachman comments that this was actually a mistake, and white should have actually taken with the bishop, threatening e5 with, whoops, sorry about that, threatening e5 with prejudice. So, okay. In any case, knight takes d4. Knight takes, bishop takes, c5. And here are his first comments. So black's queenside pawn majority is already a force to be reckoned with. White ought to have played bishop. Yeah, he mentioned this before. And yeah, so bishop e3. b5, bishop d5. And Pachman gives this a question mark. He explains, only now is white at a serious disadvantage. He should have played bishop b3, bishop b7, obviously threatening f3, c4, bishop c2. And if you don't play bishop b3, he says that even here, bishop f1 was to be preferred over the move bishop d5. Now, of course, now we're going to see why this is so and what the reason is. So knight takes d5, queen takes, obviously. Can't see much purpose in putting the pawn there, obviously, because if the pawn goes there, it's already pre-blockaded, and the bishop is an ideal blockader here, as good as the knight. Bishop b6, queen h5, bishop b3. And he notes the exchange of white squared bishop has led to a glaring weakness in the white squares, with the result that white cannot even use the important d file. Nor can he play bishop c5 because g6, after which the sorry about that. After which the queen has no way to maintain protection of the bishop, and therefore the bishop is lost. Okay. So, not great. So queen g4. And he notes, black has achieved two important strategic advantages, queenside pawn majority and the two bishops. White's last move leads at least to the elimination of the second advantage, the two bishops. Okay. So black plays queen c8. Less experienced players, and he gives us an exclamation point, usually avoid the exchange of queens when playing for a win, reserving it for when they stand worse. However, such an exchange often increases winning chances, as in this case, after queen takes queen, rook a takes c8, white would no longer be able to exchange the black squared bishops, and black's queenside majority would be relatively easy to set into motion, backed by the two bishops, which are ideal in such situations. See Volume 1. Volume 1 is all about piece play. It's an area that I feel relatively comfortable with, at least enough that I don't feel that rereading the first volume is going to add a lot to my game or my refreshing. Pawn play, on the other hand, I think I can benefit a lot more. Okay. Yeah, it looks very nice for black here. The d file is still blocked off. He's got a majority here. 3 pawns against 2. So, okay. So don't be afraid to exchange the queens if you can use it to leverage your advantages. In effect, white's queen was actually the more powerful defensive piece here. So without it, suddenly white is going to have a lot of trouble holding this. Okay. So queen f3. Queen e6. Bishop f4. Bishop takes. Queen takes. Rook a d8. And again, we still have that problem. We are unable to challenge that d file. Yeah, that's starting to look really problematic. So, Pachman comments, Black has lost the power of the two bishops working together, but White's maneuver has given him time to post his queen effectively on e6 and to occupy the d file, thus completing his development of his forces. So this is where it really gets interesting, because as a player, at least, I will say that positioning your pieces in nice squares, okay, that's absolutely essential, and there are players who made a career out of that. Karpov famously so. He's supposed to have a genius knack for finding squares that just constantly give you more and more trouble. This was, I think it was Kasparov who said that. And what I'm curious here is to see how Kolmov is going to exploit this. How is he going to convert this from this position? How does he achieve that winning final position? How does he turn this into a win? The next move actually is elementary, and I would say that it seems obvious that Black is going to use that d file, so I'll guess rook d4, rook d8, but how he's able to continue that, I do not know. All right, well, it'll be interesting to see. So f3, sure. Especially because b4 is being threatened, after all. Rook d4, knight e2. Rook d7. Okay. I'm guessing he's still going to try to get that d file of his. Why not rook d3? Bishop c1, knight c1. Okay, so yeah. Queen e3. All right. c4. At the same time, you have to ask yourself, what is White trying to achieve here? I mean, what's his plan to try to stymie Black's efforts? Knight c3. So he points out that instead of knight c3, if he had tried knight d4 to rid himself of the Black bishop, it would actually not help White. Because after queen goes to queen f6. Oh, this notation, man. Knight takes, pawn takes. Oh, sorry. Crap. Sorry. Knight takes rook d3. Ah, yes. Yeah, things are going to become really ugly really fast. And yeah, that just looks problematic. Okay. So after that, Black's major pieces would quickly decide the issue, and yeah, that's easy to believe. So rook d3, queen f2, queen e5, rook e2. So White settles for passive defense, which is equivalent to certain defeat. Okay. Now, or on the next move, he must play knight d5. On the other hand, if he tried to use his own majority, he would have a very poor endgame. And he gives a very long line here, which I'm going to skip. And I'll just trust his judgment on this. Okay, so rook ed8, rook ae1, rook d4, and this nullifies the effect of an eventual knight d5, since the black rook will no longer be cut off. And for this reason, he points out that rook ae1 was not ideal. He needed to play knight d5 immediately. Or that's what he's suggesting. Okay. So d8, queen h4. Now, I should point out that as a student of the game, when I go through these games and whatever, I do try to use my own brain while I'm analyzing and see if I come up with my own ideas, if I can predict the next move. So if I pause, sometimes it's not because I'm trying to figure out necessarily the non-algebraic notation. It's because I'm trying to get the most out of this. And I absolutely encourage you to do the same if you're not in the same habit. So queen h4. Oh, gotta admit, the position looks just terrible. I mean, even if white manages to push f4 and e5, then what? I mean, black's pieces are all over him. Yeah, it just looks terrible. All right. So a5, logical. Threatening b4, of course. Queen f2, b4, it takes, knight d5, c3, that pawn is going. Takes, and yeah, this looks like game over. So going back to the initial premise, which was how does he exploit this position, we have now seen. He basically made sure that white was unable to expand his pawns and kingside majority, and absolutely made complete use of his domination of the d file. And once he had everything in place, he started rolling those pawns. So we go to the next diagram in the book. Sorry about that. Nope, don't want to save it. Thank you. So this particular position is just randomly given. It doesn't have a name or anything. I'll get rid of that identifier, which is wrong now. And it's basically called forced exchange of pieces on a square guarded by a pawn. And again, this is to illustrate the different methods of creating and then exploiting passed pawns, which is the subject of this chapter. So rook d5, forced to take because otherwise black will lose one of the pawns, either e5 or c5. So pawn takes, and white has achieved his passed pawn, and black is stuck to either passive defense or losing material. Okay, good. And we go to our next position, our next game, which is between Alekhine and Rubinfein, Chimeri, 1937. The first 28 moves go without commentary, and therefore I will race through them. Not super fast, but enough so that we can at least follow the game and get an idea of the flow. But know that Pachman has no comments until then. Okay. It's like a walk in the park for Alekhine, although Rubinfein was certainly no pushover in 1937. That was almost at his peak of his strength. No, Alekhine was Alekhine after all. 1937, he was still king of the chess world. Okay, and this is where we basically start our analysis. And needless to say, white has a monster space advantage here. Bishop pair, space advantage, looks pretty lost. But let's see what the lesson is. So Alekhine has succeeded in posting his pieces effectively and now obtains a passed pawn by playing his knight to d5. Okay. It is interesting to note that he obtains his second passed pawn in exactly the opposite way, by capturing black's knight on c5, which will happen at move 34. This is move 28. So knight d5, pretty much forced to take. Yeah, because frankly, knight e7 is going to be an absolute nightmare. Bishop f5, rook d8, king c3. b6. Why can't he take the pawn? Because of rook c4. Oops. Oops, indeed. Okay. So, I mean, it had to be asked, right? No matter how obvious. So if rook takes d5, then something's going to go down there. Rook d4 takes, and end of story. Well, you can always give up the pawn, but you're still going to be losing a lot of material for that. All right, let's try it. See what happens. Pawn takes, rook takes. Here. And yeah, that's game over. Rook f8, bishop here. Okay. Looks pretty clear. So b6, protecting the knight. A takes b6, A takes b6, and here is the big move. Bishop takes c5. Takes c5, b6, and the horses are off. So the two bishops have completed their task, and now the two advanced passed pawns bring about a quick decision. Fair enough. 6. Exploiting the back rank weakness, needless to say. Oops, sorry. Yeah, mouse clicks are nasty. He actually gave it up. Well, I'm sure. Okay, the game actually finished that way, and it's got to be official. It's in the database. It's the same way. I will assume that this was Ruben Fine's elegant way of resigning. You know, he could just resign. He could put his king down, and he decided to just let the mate go on. Wasn't too worried about it. And people who get all cranky about, oh my gosh, he mated me, doesn't matter. Losing is losing. Mate, resigning, shaking hands. It's not going to change anything. It's still a 1-0-0-1. So, not to make too big of a fuss about it. In any case, Ruben finds a class act. So, okay. So the next example from Korchnay, this is the book. Korchnay Karpov, Moscow 1971, is interesting in that black twice forces an exchange of pieces on squares controlled by his piece. The first exchange, he's explaining this beforehand, the first exchange gives him a passed pawn, and the second forces his pawn to the 7th rank. And we've already seen that second factor at work in game number 1, the Furman-Kolmov. The note to black's 36th move. And okay. So that's. And the first comments really start at move 12. It goes pretty fast, actually. It's pretty light on the commentaries. The first one is actually on move 24. Okay. So let's take a look at this exemplary game. Karpov is black, and he will win this game. I should put that in the description. So knight f6, g3, d5, that takes, bishop g2, g6. He goes light on the comments because he wants us just to see the flow and how it's done. But the idea isn't to analyze the game too deeply. And be warned, even in the book, the notes are really light. I will actually show you a page of it so you can get an idea. And as you can see, it's not very detailed, but okay, it is what it is. So bishop g7, e4. All right. C2, knight x6, bishop f4, g4. I am not an expert on the theory of this. I'm not an expert of practically any game, but... And here we have the first strong move, knight d4. Okay, so this has to be considered the first key move of creating a passed pawn. Okay. If queen c3, then knight check. Or knight c3. They're both good. All right. So takes, f3, queen b6. It must be said that Karpov displays, of course, world champion, but he was going to be world champion in a few years. But nevertheless, Karpov displays incredible judgment here because not a few players would be nervous about leaving that pawn on d4. Yes, it looks strong, but that pawn could easily become a target, especially with the white pawns in front. There's no way to place a black rook on the d file to uphold it. So, okay. 95. Takes. As you can see, he's already trying to give Karpov a hard time on that pawn of his. f6. Be gone. Be gone, you knave. Rook ac8. Queen a4. g5. Wow, that's a move. This is absolutely not an obvious move for him to play. And the reason is this. I mean, from my perspective, maybe a grandmaster will just go, oh, of course, that's the move to play. Um, but from my perspective, Black often will be looking for different ways to leverage, advance his pawns, and create openings, and open up the position. And that would usually be done by moves, not now, but at some point like f5 or even e6. So g5 really means that's not the plan at all. And he's not threatening h5, h4 here because there's no attack here. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Not there. He is getting rid of the bishop. Is the bishop a problem? I mean, yes, the bishop's there, but it's not doing anything. So maybe his idea is just to prevent the bishop from going to h6. I suppose. Well, okay. In any case, it's Karpov. Who am I to argue? Certainly not arguing, but I'm trying to understand. Bishop c1, fair. Bishop c2, bishop e2, rook e1, d3. Oh boy. Bishop f1, bishop takes. Yeah. I mean, this is breathtaking because that pawn on d3, man, just looks like it's just waiting for somebody to come and pick him up. Wow. Okay. Yes, Black has knight b4 or c5 at some stage, but the white bishop there can always attack it, and then what? All right. Well, I'm not saying this is an immediate threat, but looks like it. Rook c2, bishop e3, knight c5, queen d4. So far, white has defended very well and should now play, and this is his comment, queen a3. Yeah, I can get behind that. Followed by rook c8. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop, sorry. Queen takes d3. Rook takes b2. And this gives a slight edge for black. Okay. So queen d4, not the best. e5. Pawn takes, en passant. Queen takes, rook c1. Rook c8. b4. Trying to get d3. Okay. Can he? Knight takes e4. Ouch. That hurts. Oh, nasty. So And this is credit to Pachman, not me. In this position, if you're wondering why he can't take d3 now, and he doesn't, it's because, and of course, I saw this. After queen takes d3, knight takes f2. Ouch. And to illustrate the consequence of this, if rook takes f2, then this rook is left hanging. If rook takes c2, knight takes queen. If bishop takes f2, again the rook is left hanging. So yeah, it's a big oops situation. Nice. Way to go, Karpov. Since obviously Karpov had planned this, and probably well ahead. Rook takes c2, d takes c2, rook c1, b6, and because of that little tactical astuce, as we say in French, trick, black's pawn is now on c2, and that bishop is unable to touch it. Oy, oy, oy. f3, knight d6, queen d3, rook c6. Obviously, queen takes a2 is not possible because of queen takes d6. So, rook d6. And this pawn is still untouchable because of a similar problem with e3. If rook takes c2, rook takes c2, queen takes c2, queen takes e3, thank you very much. So, queen c4, queen d2, knight f7, getting rid of that problem once and for all, and freeing the queen to give white no end of trouble. All right. f4, g4, b5, rook c8, queen d7, h5, king f2, queen c3. Impressive game by Karpov, and yeah. But still, it has to be said that his judgment and the way he handled that pawn of his, which constantly looked like it was a potential target, and instead was this giant thorn in Korchnoy's side. I'm not sure everybody would be up for that, but okay. Karpov's the man. All right. So next position. So this is a classic breakthrough, well known to pretty much every player beyond a certain point. If you're not familiar with it, it's worth knowing now. It's a very standard breakthrough point. B6 is the winning move for black, for white, my apologies. And it doesn't matter what black does. Obviously, you're threatening to take, so you have to take it. And if you take it with the c pawn, then you play a6, and you have to take because otherwise white will take, and we have a pass pawn. And it's, of course, it's the same thing if you do it with an a pawn, then you just invert it with c6, pawn takes, a6. This theme might seem only theoretical, you know, just one of those weird esoteric demonstrations. But believe it or not, over the years of I hesitate to call it chess career, but okay, my chess playing, I've seen this position become a factor. I won't say that this exact thing has come up exactly on the board, but it's been a factor in which it has threatened to come up on the board, or let's say a variant thereof. And as a result, play went around it to try to prevent it from happening or to prevent it from having its venom. Now here, obviously, it's because the kings are so far away that it's just the pawns all by themselves having to take care of themselves. But there are situations, even with some pieces, where just the threat of having that pawn running around means that you're going to be completely paralyzed trying to stop that pawn. And you might even stop that pawn, and you will then have to worry about the other side where you might be getting killed. So this position has more than just a theoretical, conceptual value. So I'm going to cut short the positional overview now. I will absolutely be continuing this the next time. But right now I want to go to my next point of study, and that's going to be the endgame. For the endgame, endgames have to be considered my Achilles heel. I mean, positional play used to be it, and I'm smartened up a little bit, so I'm probably not as bad. I wouldn't consider it my strong point, but let's just say I'm not necessarily constantly being bullied the way I used to be on some stages. I used to bully back with my tactical and calculations, honestly, which was how my ratings sort of balanced out against the players who were more savvy with their piece placement play and so forth. And endgames, yeah, not so much. Yeah, I know opposition and things like that, but I wouldn't say it goes much beyond that, though. So Dvoretsky is going to be a very valuable tool here. And okay, so I read the introduction by Jakob Agard. I hope I'm not butchering his name. He is, I think he's Swedish. Swedish IM at the time. He's now a grandmaster. And he notes that he had been allowed to look at the earlier previews of the great Endgame manual, which has since undergone several revisions and additions and whatever. And he says that one of the things that he realized was how important it was to learn to calculate with great precision all of these lines and these positions, notably in pawn endgames. As it happens to be, Dvoretsky's work starts with the pawn endgames. Now, there's a great big introduction as to how the digital version in chess-based bases is constructed. So green medals are the exercises and whatnot. And I'll spare you that kind of explanation because it won't actually appear here in the video or on the board. I'll just tell you what's going on, and if there's an exercise that has to be solved, well, then we have to solve it. So now to Dvoretsky. Okay, so this is the first position that Dvoretsky shows in his magnificent book on pawn endgames. The book is not on pawn endgames. This is the section on pawn endgames. And he says that pawn endings are very concrete. Even the tiniest change in the position generally alters the shape and outcome of the struggle. Here you can rarely get along on general principles. You must know how to calculate accurately. So Agard's prologue comment is to the point. The study of pawn endings chiefly boils down to not the memorization of exact positions, but the assimilation of standard techniques, which considerably ease our search for a solution and the calculation of variations, like normal chess, really. If you understand the general principles, and you're not a computer that can calculate 14 billion moves, then you can use these principles to guide the moves that you should be considering or not considering. Most pawn endings are clearly defined tempo battles. Okay. In these endgames, speed is everything. Which pawn will queen first? Will the king come in time to stop the passed pawn, or get to the other side of the board in time? And there are other pawn endings in which a war of maneuver predominates and in which Zugzwang assumes paramount importance. Key squares. Key squares are what we call those squares whose occupation by the king assures victory, regardless of whose turn it is to move. Okay? In other types of endgame, we also speak of key squares for other pieces besides the king. So here we have the d5 square on which the king now stands, the white king, and it is not a key square. White to move does not win. The key squares are c6, d6, and e6. If black were to move anywhere, one of those squares would be free, allowing the enemy king onto one of those key squares, after which the position would be won. Since it's white to move, the position is drawn since he cannot move to any of those key squares. Okay. So here we have the next part of our lesson. And after that, we're going to start getting bombarded with exercises and work. So in this position, we have, with the white pawn on the 5th rank, the key squares are not A7, B, are not only A7, B7, and C7, but also the squares A6, B6, and C6. White wins even if he is to move. So we play king A6. Oh, wait. King A8, B6, king B8, B7, and of course, black cannot prevent the pawn from queening. And he notes, however, that even though king C6 is a mistake, because after king A7, white has to return to the starting position with king C7. B6 would actually throw away the win. And after that, there is no way to win. B7, king B8, and yeah, there's nothing to do. And after king A8, you come back to the initial position. So king C6 wins in as much as it doesn't throw away the win. It just forces you to come back and find king A6 to be able to win. So in this particular position, it's good to know you can win, and you must absolutely play to the rook file. King A6, only move that wins. Okay. Third illustrative example. The key squares are B6, A6, B6, and C6. So white has to get to one of these three squares. Okay. And the way to do this is, the sensible thing here is to head for the square furthest from the enemy king, since that will be the hardest one to defend. And the furthest one from the king, being the king on F8, is of course A6. So king C2, king E7, king B3, king D6, king A4. Note that king C4 would be a tremendous blunder, because now black is the one who has reached C6, and it's a draw. So king A4, king C6, king A5, threatening to go to A6, king B7, king B5, and we've reached that other position where now black is forced to concede one of these three squares. If the king comes here, then we enter on A6. If he comes to A7, we penetrate to C6. And of course, any other square that he goes behind, well, we can choose which one we want, whichever one we want. Okay. So far, so good. So now we have the first part of the lesson. King Moravec Joseph. So this is a composed position. And we are not actually asked to solve this, although we are welcome to do so. And although I can actually see the solution here, you are welcome to pause it now if you want to try to solve it on your own. In my case, it would make no sense because, like I said, this is the ChessBase database version, and the notation's right in front of me. Hidden from you, but I can see it. So it'd be cheating if I pretended I found it. I say, oh my gosh, I found it. No, not really. So king F2. H4. And here is the key concept. King G1. We go behind to grab the pawn. And the reason we are told is after the natural looking king f3, it does look natural, it's refuted by h3. Ah, this is the key point. If the pawn is taken, black's king heads for h8, and of course there's no win possible. So just to show, king takes here, and you cannot prevent the king from reaching h8, and there's no way to win this. So after h3, if you try to play g4 to prevent that from happening, try to grab the pawn behind, white cannot gain control of the key squares on the sixth rank, which would be, of course, these three, which we learned about earlier. So he illustrates this by king d7, go after the pawn, you have to do it. And black got there first. So h4, king g1. Now, of course, the question is h3. It's the only move to really try to prevent white from winning. g3, not g4. The key squares for a pawn on g3 are on the fifth rank, as opposed to g4, where they'd be on the sixth rank. And what that means is, okay, so it's basically two squares ahead of the pawn. When it was on g4, then it was the sixth. When it's on 3, it's on the fifth. And as a result, white is closer to those squares and will be able to get there faster. Okay? And we, of course, are shown why. King d7, king h2, king e6, king takes h3, king f5, king h4, king g6, king g4, and white has the opposition. Brilliant. So, yeah, this is presumably the Hall of Shame, and I'm therefore not going to put the poor players' names. The lady playing white, this was in Saloniki Olympiad in 1988. The lady playing white, Scotland's board number 1, saw that she must lose the d5 pawn, and therefore resigned. And what can I say except no comment needed? And that's correct. And of course, it's no comment needed because we've had the benefit of seeing the previous illustrative examples, and therefore why this is not going to work. So in this position, obviously, white will try to keep protecting it, but cannot do anything about it. Obviously, going down will allow king e6, so she can come here. And white is in Zugzwang, and of course the pawn is going down, but it's not actually a problem. We can just go here, 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 and it's a draw. So yeah, losing the pawn would not have ended the game, unless of course you resign. So this time we are showed a game between Rudolf Spielmann and Ulrich Duras in 1907 Carlsbad. And in this particular position, white blundered tragically. He played rook f4, and these are examples not to embarrass the history because maybe these players are not alive, certainly not Spielmann, but to illustrate the dangers and traps you could fall into or be lulled into. Obviously, in this particular position, after rook f4, if black were to play rook takes, king takes, it's a draw. But Duras was not so naive, and he played king g5, and suddenly white has no choice but to take, and suddenly it is black who has the opposition and wins. So a nice little method or trick, if you want to call it that, in such situations. Good to know. White has the opposition, but it's not enough to win. And there's only one way for black to save this. Otherwise, of course, it would be too easy. King c7 is the right move. However, what would happen if black were to play king a7, the mistake? That's kind of the interesting point. So after king a7, a mistake, white would play a5, pawn takes. No, there's no option really. King takes, and here getting the opposition decides. b7, king b5, king c7, king c5, etc. We've seen this aplenty. So king c7, king a6, and obviously trying to do the same little trick with c5 is not going to work because the a pawn will not win. So king a6 going around, king c6, king a7. And the point obviously is that after king c5, doesn't show this, but I'll just show it because it's kind of obvious. After king c5, king b7, you have to take one of the pawns. It won't matter which. So you take this one, take, and suddenly you cannot stop one of the pawns from advancing. It doesn't matter which of the pawns you take. Once you choose one, the other pawn will be the chosen one to queen and win the game. So after king a7, king c7, asking white what does he plan to do. And the move is quite lovely. King a8, obviously with the idea king c6, king b8. And he shows this. Fair enough. King c6, king b8, king c5, king b7, and we get to that position from before. And as a result, king a8, king c8, black is in no rush to try anything. There's no way to win this. So even though white has the opposition, black saves the game. And part of it is because the a pawn is not enough to win. So basically he only has to worry about these two here. And last one of the day, and after that I'm going to call it a day. There will be some more examples and some exercises, but, well, time to rest the little gray cells, as Hercule Poirot was fond of saying. So in this position, we have a composition by Hermann Neustadtel from 1890. And the only thing that saves white is getting the distant opposition. And the distant opposition here is the remarkably lovely looking king h1. Outstanding. But of course, it's not enough just to say king h1 is the saving grace for white. You have to show why the other moves fail. And of course, an author and analyst as meticulous as the great Mark Dvoretsky does not fail to do so. So the first question would be, what about king g3? And that's perfectly fair. So after king g3, there comes king e1, king g2, king e2, king g3, king f1. And we get into that funny little position of before. Since now white is going to be forced to go up, choose one of the pawns, black will take the pawn left, and the rest is going to queen. So a well-chosen example, which is a continuation of the previous example. Okay. So king h1, and king f1. But this is a mistake too, since after king d2, king f2, king d3, and the f3 square, his king needs is occupied by his own pawn, and therefore the opposition passes to his opponent. So you would have, let's say, king f1 or king g3, king e3, king g2, king e2, and black has gotten the opposition. Impressive stuff. So after king h1, king d2, king h2, king d3, king h3, and white is able to hold the draw by maintaining the opposition. Note that king d2 is not going to change anything. If you try king e1, then king g1, same thing. And if you try a trick like g4, king g2, not taking, king d2, f takes g4. And why king g2, you might ask? And the obvious reason is because black will queen with check otherwise. And this makes all the difference in the world. So for example, f takes, take, advance, 2. And we have a crucial check. And after that, of course, black is an easy win. So the king g2 allows us, black cannot take because, of course, now the pawn here is lost. And therefore, the game is to be able to save because king d2. And this time we take, and there's no check. So both will queen, and yeah, it's a draw. Nice, nice, nice. So that's going to wrap up the training session of today. I hope you've enjoyed and benefited from it as much as I have. I certainly found a lot of it very interesting. And in the next one, I will continue all of these 3 themes, look deeper into Dvoretsky, some of the exercises he has at the end, I'm presuming are going to be hair-raising. I can only saw it on the list listed as exercise 1, 2, and then solution in the next position. So it'll be fun to try those. See more of Ludek Pachman's work, and of course, some more tactics. So thank you for sharing this with me, and happy chess and good mates.